This conference will now be recorded.
My mic's not working, so I'll try to talk loud enough you can hear me. It is 9:34. We will call this meeting of the Technical Advisory Committee to order. Roll into opportunity for public comment. Is there anybody from the public that wishes to address the TAC? I see some people look like they're from the public, but I know they're not in the room. Is there anybody online that wishes to make comment?
There are 15 people online and no public comment.
Okay, thank you. All right, agenda item 3 is an action item regarding approval of the meeting minutes from the May 6, 2026 meeting. This is pages 5 through 9 in your packet. Are there any revisions or changes needed to the minutes? If there aren't any, I will entertain a motion. Motion approved. Who did the motion? Second. Any changes or discussion? Okay, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? That item carries. Agenda item 4 is a discussion item only regarding amendments to the Transportation Planning Policy Board, TPPB, bylaws related to the appointment, annual appraisal, and disciplinary actions, including termination of the MPO Director, pages 10 through 21. This is my item. I do not intend to be terminated. I'm just letting everybody know. TxDOT is, and this is the next agenda item, actually, these two things kind of roll together. Over the past 2 years, TxDOT has been working on updating the agreement for which the fiscal agent, TxDOT, and the MPO, how they do things. There's a special provision in the new amendment that states that the MPO Director basically there has to be something in the bylaws to mention what that process is. I don't know if any of you are aware, up in the North Central Texas COG region, their policy board or their transportation director of more than 30 years was terminated by the COG, and then the Transportation Planning Policy Board said absolutely not. So they've got their own thing going on. So this kind of, I think this is TxDOT's way of saying, hey, this is how we do it at this MPO to cover everything. Those revisions, that revision is in there. I believe Kendra provided a red line. There are a couple other revisions that are really non-material, changing Port Cavazos back to Port Hood. I'm adding TCEQ. Like I said, the biggest change though is the addition of the MPO Director and fiscal / staffing agent roles and responsibilities. Did I miss anything else, Kendra? With that, I'm happy to answer any questions on the proposed amendments, receive any recommendations. This is just a discussion item at this time.
Do you like them? I mean, are they good?
Yeah.
For what you think?
Yeah, we worked through them a little bit. So. And I think it covers what TxDOT is requiring. So, all right. No questions. We will move to agenda item 5, which is a discussion item regarding the updated Metropolitan Planning Agreement between KTMPO, Central Texas Council of Governments, and TxDOT for the upcoming agreement cycle. This is pages 22 through 40 in your packet. Our contract with TxDOT, TPP, has been extended twice now as they work through updating their agreement. MPOs across the state had a lot of opportunity to provide input into some of these recommended changes that are in here. There aren't any real major changes that will impact the board itself or the way we do business, except the one I just mentioned about the bylaws and ensuring that there's a correlation for the MPO director. Everything else is pretty similar to what it was, but it did take a couple of years to get this done. This will come before the policy board in June. If you have a chance to look through it and you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us. We've worked through it quite a bit with TxDOT, so we're pretty familiar with this agreement. Like I said, it's very similar to the one we signed in 2018. So yeah, few revisions and updates, but nothing really material that impacts the policy board. And you're standing directly in what your roles and responsibilities are. Any questions, comments, concerns, gripes? This is an easy agreement, man. I love this. All right. Agenda item 6 is a discussion item regarding review of the travel demand model base year demographics, pages 41 through 52. This is Hamza Kahn with Kimley-Horn. Are they online?
They are.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Well, good morning. Thank you.
Good morning. Do you want me to go ahead and share my screen, Kendra, or will you all pull the presentation up? Okay, perfect.
Yes, we'll advance for you, Hamza. Thank you.
Okay, sounds good. Well, good morning, everyone. I'll just be walking through today our process on the KTMPO network and demographic update. This presentation is going to be focused on the base year demographics. So the purpose of today's presentation is to give you an overview how the base year population and employment estimates have been developed, how those totals are allocated, and kind of the overview of the project schedule. So if we can go to the next slide. So today's agenda is kind of broken down into 4 parts. Some of this y'all have already seen. So the control totals, those were previously presented by UTSA at, I think, maybe 2 TAC meetings ago. So I'll just give a brief overview of that, and then we'll walk through the methodology that we use for the allocation of population and employment. And then we will go over those population and employment graphics and maps. And then lastly, we'll touch on the schedule and next steps. So next slide. I'm sure many of y'all are pretty familiar with this map. This is the map of KTMPO's Metropolitan Planning Area boundary, and that's the geographic area that we are updating the demographics for. So this boundary includes the major communities and such as Killeen-Temple, Parker Heights, Nolanville, Belton, and other places. It includes other major corridors within it. So for today's discussion, the boundary is important because that's where we are allocating the demographic totals, and that's where we're updating the network as well. So next slide. This slide shows the control totals for the KTMPO boundary area. This is for 2025 base year. One thing I want to mention is that the model gets updated every 5 years. The last update was done in 2020. And as a result, since it was during 2020 and 2020 was an odd year they were conducting the census, but simultaneously COVID was happening. So the update wasn't as broad as it's typically, just because there's a lot of changes happening. So the current model's base year is actually 10 years ago, so which is 2015. So it's a pretty sizable update that we're doing, bringing the population update from 2015 out to 2025. These are the control totals that were previously presented by UTSA. That is basically the targets that we are going out for. So I'll just go over those quickly. So total population, it says GQ plus POP. So GQ is group quarters, and those are areas such as, you all have Fort Hood, so anyone living on base is considered in group quarters. People living on college campuses or dormitories or other facilities like that, those are considered group quarters. Jails are considered group quarters. So total population includes population plus group quarter. So the forecast or the estimate of population for the KTMPO area is roughly 470,000. There is approximately 173,000 households within this area, which makes the KTMPO household size an average of 2.64 people per household. Median income is 68,000, and the employment is 140,000. I want to put an asterisk to this employment because we were coordinating with TxDOT and TPP on this employment numbers, and looking at the 2015 model, they're higher than what was being projected for 2025. And one of the things related to that is the group quarter employment, that is the employment within Fort Hood, is potentially not accounted for in the control totals memorandum. So that's one thing we are looking into right now. And Kendra is helping us with that. She's reached out to Fort Hood on our behalf, and we're going to coordinate with them to see if they have more accurate numbers for employment within the base itself as well. So, or if, if Kendra reaches out to y'all on the TAC to help us with that, that would be very helpful, because that will get us to a more accurate employment number. Because currently we are estimating that this employment is lower than what is actually within the region. So that's the control totals. Next slide is our TAZ population allocation methodology. So we do one for population and one for employment. So this slide shows kind of a step-by-step process of allocating a population and the households from the control totals. So what UTSA provides is at a larger county level scale. What we are doing is breaking it down into a traffic analysis zone, which is a smaller area that's defined within the model to allocate that population within those zones. And what those zones do is those are the zones that produce the trips. So a traffic analysis zone encompasses the population in it, the employment in it. So a zone could be a neighborhood. So that zone would just could be 500 people with 100 households. Or it could be a mixed use zone, which is there's population and employment there. So you could have an apartment and single family homes, as well as some employment. It could be retail employment, basic employment, service employment, or even education employment. So the point of this allocation is UTSA, the control totals memorandum, provides it at a high level. We have to break it down into a smaller level that works for the model. So our process is kind of a 6 to 7 step process. We start with the control totals from the memorandum. Those totals are available at a larger geography. So the next step is to disaggregate them. That is step 2. To the TAZ level, to do that, we use census block group data and parcel data to understand where housing and population are located today. And from there, we kind of identify, based on the parcel data, the type and location of residential development, such as single family, townhome, multifamily parcels, duplexes. And then we estimate the number of households associated with those parcels. And then once those households are assigned, we apply the average household size information from the Census Bureau. So that's the step 4 right there, to get the actual population and households within that TAZ. So that's kind of step 4 and 5. And then 6 and 7 is basically after that first allocation, we compare the TAZ level results back to the control totals memorandum and then make refinements. And then once we kind of match that control totals, what we then do, and that's the current process we're in right now, is we go through and check visually on aerials to make sure like the population that we've allocated to these various zones, especially some of the zones that might have larger population, to make sure that that is accurately reflected. I know that was a mouthful, so I'll just pause there briefly to see if there's any questions on our allocation methodology or how we go about the process. So yeah, I'll pause there and see if there's any questions. Okay. Hearing no questions, can you go to the next slide? We do basically a similar process for the employment, but one of the things about the employment data is slightly different than how the population data is provided. Employment data is actually provided on a point-by-point or address-by-address basis. So it's actually a little bit easier to allocate that rather than the population data. One of the things with population data is that the census block groups boundaries don't necessarily match easily with the TAZ boundaries. So you have to do some ArcGIS gymnastics to get those lined up. But with employment data, it's much easier because it's point data fits neatly within the TAZs. So we start with point-based employment data sources such as data axle and loads. That's step 1, because these data sets are provided employment locations in point format. They can be aggregated easily into TAZs to estimate the number of jobs in each zones. And then after aggregating, so step 2, after going into step 3, we compare the TAZ level employment results against the regional totals. So where the initial allocation does not align well with the control totals, we make adjustments similar to the population data. A key item for this update is, I mentioned previously, is that we're trying to coordinate with Fort Hood. That is one of the things where we feel like the employment may be low based on what we're getting. So we are currently in the process of just at a draft format for the employment and waiting till we get some of that information to help refine and update that. And then similar to population, once we get those numbers, we will iterate, adjust, and make sure the final allocation makes sense. The other thing that's key with employment allocation is schools. So getting school employment correct. A lot of times the data we receive for schools is usually employment is located where maybe the ISD is located, not necessarily the school itself. So we have to sometimes disaggregate that, and we kind of go through and find all the various schools within the region and try to look up their information in terms of numbers of teachers and students, and then disaggregate. So, and then similar to population, we kind of disaggregate, iterate, and refine. Next slide. So I would say this is a draft map of basically the population for KTMPO area. What you see is basically different shades of red. Anything on the lighter side is less than 100 population. Anything on the darker color side, the darkest color of red being more than 2,500 people located there. So what we're currently doing is going through this process and verifying, especially the higher zones, so like the 500 to 1,000, 1,000 to 2,500, and more than 2,500, that those locations are correct. And this is what, once we submit the draft to Kendra and her team, that's what they will be kind of double checking for us as well, based on their local knowledge of this information. And employment, if you can go to the next slide. Similar map. The one thing that I do want to verify or put an asterisk on it, I've mentioned a couple times already, is that this is draft employment. We're pretty much done with the population allocation, but employment is going to take us a little bit longer since we found the discrepancy between 2015 and 2025, and we're reaching out to Fort Hood to get some of those numbers. So that's going to slide our schedule a little bit, but we should still be on track. We coordinated with TxDOT yesterday. I think the main thing is for us, since it's such a large update, it's better to get it right and take a little bit longer. They have buffer built into their schedule as well. So we are going through employment. I think generally speaking, most of the employment allocation is reflective of what we receive in terms of the data. The couple of final checks we're making on this is Fort Hood and school allocation, as those are two kind of things that can throw some of the stuff off. Fort Hood employment could be anywhere from 10,000 to 20,000 employees, and that's a large attraction zone. And we want to make sure we get that right. And we're also coordinating with them on where those gates are to make sure that those specific points are getting loaded. There might be other roadways, but they might not actually be access points to the fort itself. Because the next step for us after this is actually to update the network itself, since the network is also from 2015. So with that, I will go, if we can go to the next slide. This is kind of the overall schedule and what we would be working on. So base year demographics is what we're currently working on. Base year demographics is we got kicked off week of April 20th. We're currently working through those, planning on submitting draft demographics. Initially, it was going to be today, but I think due to some of the Fort Hood stuff, we are delaying that to end of next week, depending on when we receive that information. And then once we submit that, TxDOT and the MPO has 2 weeks to review that information, provide any comments back to us, and we'll update that and finalize draft demographics. The intent with that is to bring that back to you all for the next TAC meeting for approval on those draft demographics. And if for whatever reason, if you can't get approval, we'll slide that down to the further on TAC meetings. After we do base year demographics, the next step for us is to update the network itself. So the network itself is back from 2015, and there's been a lot of changes in the network, improvements on I-35, other roadway corridors. So we want to make sure that that network is up to date. So that will be our step 2 in the process. The goal is to come to that July 1st TAC meeting with a draft network, but also we're currently thinking of having a small workshop with you all to get an understanding of like, hey, these are the changes we've incorporated. Is there anything we've missed? And then also getting y'all's feedback on the future allocation of population and employment. So what we'll do is the maps you saw, we'll print versions of those and bring those out to the meeting and basically get y'all's feedback on where you think employment and population growth is likely headed. Because what we will do is when we allocate that future employment and population, we want to have local and stakeholder input in terms of where we think that population is going, rather than just us kind of guessing at it. We have a process, we call it a suitability analysis, which is, we'll explain a little bit more during that workshop, but to give you a quick overview, it's basically determining how suitable a plot area of land, considering a TAZ, is for development. So it can be based off of roadway infrastructure, developable land available, any constraints such as, if you're in the floodplain or things like that. And that gives us a general understanding of where development could happen, but it's important to get y'all's feedback on, the trends y'all are seeing within the larger area of where population and employment is headed. So that would be the intent of July 1st TAC meeting. And then there's no TAC meeting in August, but September, we would be bringing back both the network and the demographics for approval, the future demographics for approval. And then once we have approval on those, most of the project at that point is pretty much wrapped up. If we have delays, like we mentioned, where the schedule is already sliding, we do have the October 7th TAC where we don't currently have anything specified for it, where we could bring some of that stuff back to get approval for. And the goal is to provide everything to TxDOT on December 4th. We did have a conversation with them. That date is slightly slidable. They said, because of some of these employment changes that are occurring, if it does take longer for us to get that employment data, there is flexibility within that date. But our goal for right now is to get everything done by December 4th. They did say December 4th for base year for sure, but future year could come in January or February as well. But that's not our intent. Our intent would be to just get everything wrapped up by December 4th, stick to the schedule we developed. Next slide. Just a quick overview of the next steps. I will say the first bullet point will change as of yesterday. So that, I think we're going to be aiming for June 12th, as long as we get the data from Fort Hood on time. And then we'll update our base year employment data and then we'll upload it to TxDOT SharePoint, where both the MPO and TxDOT can download the data and review it. And then the step after that I mentioned is developing the master network, conducting the suitability analysis, and then having us come to that TAC meeting. Actually, yeah, in July. I think that's all I have. Is there any questions on that?
Growth, but you also mentioned that you really need feedback from our region on major growth areas over the last 10 years since the 2015 model. Do you mind touching on that, please?
Yeah, so one of the things that's a good question. One of the things that we are doing is, we're allocating growth based on parcel data, as I mentioned, but if you're familiar with any new larger developments that have been done since 2015, I know that's a long time frame. It could even be since 2020. This could be like large single family neighborhoods, like 500 homes or 1,000 homes, or basically above 100 homes. Because what we're going to do is go through the TAZ, which is the traffic analysis zones, and see if any of those zones need to be split up because new roads have been developed or new neighborhoods have been developed, and a single TAZ is now too large and has too much data in it to where it needs to be split so that it can load the model better. So if you're aware of any large developments or new roadways that have been built, and these roadways need to be basically arterial level and up, so not residential streets or collector streets, because the model is a regional model. It doesn't include neighborhood collectors or residential streets in it. That would be one of the other things we would be looking for y'all to get feedback on. So that way, when we are doing the network and TAZ update, if we need to split any TAZs, we have that information from y'all. We'll also be looking at seeing what TAZs need to be split, but if that information is ready to be available from y'all, since y'all are familiar with the area, that would be helpful for us to have. Any other questions on either the schedule, population, employment, questions on the methodology?
Good morning, Hamza. This is Salahuddin from UTSA. I have a question just to know what is the source of the parcel data, and is there any like field for the house type as you mentioned in the like single family or multi-family household? The parcel data, is there any like
Yes,
variable available?
there is. We got it from U.S. Census Bureau, but their source is actually the County Appraisal District. And for both Bell County, Coryell, and Lampasas County, they have the parcel type indicated in there. So they have, I'm going to mess up the types because I'm not recalling them, but let's just say it's like A1 is single family, A2 is duplex, A3 is multiplex, A4 is multifamily. So that's what we looked at when we looked at the parcel data. And if it was multifamily, what we did was, I think there was about 600 or so that were defined as multifamily. We went to those areas just to get an understanding of how big some of those apartments were. We checked them on Street View and aerial views to get an understanding, are these like 50 home or 50 household apartments, or these 200 or 300 household apartments, to make sure that we get that number right. But yes, the parcel data that we retrieved from Census Bureau did have that type listed in there for the population side of things. We did not use the parcel data for employment, just for population. But good
Yeah.
question, Sal.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your explanation.
Any other questions?
Anything? All right. Going once, going twice, sold. Thank you,
All right.
Hamza.
Thanks, y'all.
All right. Do you have any follow-up on that, Kendra? Nothing? Agenda item 7 is a discussion item regarding draft category program funding balance policy. This is pages 53 through 61 in your packet. Kendra.
We recently received a notice from the city of Belton that they have received community project funding, full federal funding for their Connell Street corridor. And this funding covers both segments of Connell Street. So there's roughly just under $5 million that will become available for reallocation. This amendment will come forward to the TAC and Policy Board in November for the November SIP amendment. We have also over the last year received about $3 to $4 million in requests for additional funds for projects that have already been committed into the TIP. So given the requests that we've received for additional funds due to construction inflation costs and the reallocation of the money that was originally programmed for the Belton project, we have drafted a fund balance policy to help guide not only this situation, but future situations and be an extension of our project selection process. We have in the past always had available funds. We've always had extra funds in the UCP. So this is kind of a unique situation that we've faced over the last year of receiving more requests than we have funds for. And now with funds going back into the pot, whether we fund additional projects into the TIP or those that are already committed to the TIP that are receiving additional expenses. So we want to have a policy in place to discuss, to guide this decision, but also future decisions as well. All of the information is in your packet. The letter from the city of Belton, as well as you'll see on this listing right here, these are all of the pending requests that we've received broken out by category. So you can see the dates listed of each project that has requested, the percent of cost increase, you can see there as well. And these are also, you'll see a yellow and white spreadsheet of projects where we have merged the minor roadway and livability projects into one list here for you. The money that is being redistributed from Belton is category 7. That money can be put on roadway or livability projects. So the projects you see on the screen in yellow, those are already in the TIP. If we were to follow a ranked and ready process, the next eligible projects, if you went in the direction of livability, there's a sidewalk project, a 3rd Street sidewalk project, as well as a Georgetown Railroad Trails project. But if we replace that minor roadway project with another minor roadway project, it would come down to project number 16, Southwest Parkway, which is Belton's preference in their letter, in their request, is to put that unused funds onto Southwest Parkway. So this is more information than what we're ready to talk about just yet. But this is what we wanted to go ahead and put before you so that you can see kind of how complicated the decision, in the direction is. There's really kind of 2 or 3 different ways that this money could be redistributed and why we need a policy in place. So if you access a draft policy on the front table when you came in, you'll see that, again, the funds could either be committed to existing TIP projects. They could advance new projects from the MTP into the TIP, or in rare cases, we would have a call for projects. So it's really the first 2 options that are most realistic for this current situation. But we are wanting to gauge the TAC and then also the policy board, and then we'll make changes to this policy and bring it back next month. But the priority is what we are seeking feedback on, of if it would be the priority of the TAC and essentially the policy board to fund existing TIP projects that have balances when we do have extra funds available, or putting those funds onto new projects into the TIP.
I think the other thing is we need to, if it's the choice of the board and the TAC, to make the option to maintain those projects that are in the TIP and add, what percentage of support do we want to give? I mean, we've had requests for almost double the amount. Do we go up to 100% the original ask, or do we, what does that percentage look like? I know in our we already have an administrative amendment that allows us internally to go up to like 50% of the cost, as long as it doesn't exceed $1 million. But I think we need to see, the board and the TAC need to think about what that percentage looks like. If somebody were to come in and ask for up to 100% of what they originally asked for, so we're doubling the project. It's discussion item only. Kendra and staff have been working diligently on this, as we realize we really do need a process in place moving forward to deal with the fund, the ebbs and flows of funding as they're being seen.
existing policy, Ryan was talking about, is that a different document? Obviously different than what we have here. Is it something that could be amended to include this information, or are we looking at a different level decision process? Would our decision making here affect the existing policy?
So currently, our project scoring process is allocating funds based on rank readiness and availability of funding. And it kind of just stops there. That is getting projects into the TIP. But when funds are redistributed or new funding becomes available, we have not had this case before 2025, where we now have a full deck of projects that are short on funds. We've always been able to just answer, all of the requests and satisfy those requests. So it does not go this extra step. The current policy does not, of when additional funds are available. So this is where we're really needing to address that.
So will these decisions affect the policy that you already mentioned?
If you decided to say, hey, we're going to go to 25%, then that would be the direction here. I think it's, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's a federal rule that allows administrative amendments, which is what we've been relying on. So if this board were to say, we're only going to authorize the staff to do an administrative amendment up to 25%, then that's what staff will do. Same for, I don't know that we could do above 50% for administrative, but we could do any amount over as a formal amendment.
Do we have to have a certain percentage of the allocation that's a fund balance? Kind of reserved just in case there are, for these administrative.
I mean, we don't have to. We typically have tried to keep a couple $100,000 in there specifically for that purpose.
And we currently do have a slight fund balance. We're like category 9, for example. We have like $1.5 million. But so we do have the policy of what constitutes as an administrative amendment. It doesn't go beyond that of whether those extra funds, the balances, go to fulfilling existing projects. But where we land on this policy will affect the decision of how those funds are handled, or passed back from Belton, whether they go to the list of pending requests that you saw on that sheet, if they go to funding new projects into the TIP. There's a couple of ways that can be handled.
I think this is me talking, but I like the general categories that you've come up with, maintaining existing projects, because they've already gone through the drill of, securing their position on the list. And I think the last category should be initiating, maybe not a new call, but but that is probably the best way to put it. Have some new projects, open the door for, let's say you have enough money for, I think it's good to have it on the list, but I think these criteria are good. I think it provides a good skeleton to put some weight on. I don't know how to go. I don't know. I mean, I don't, I haven't been involved in this for some time. I don't know how to take the first steps to articulate any kind of prioritization in terms of thinking. If you have things that need to change, I don't know how you could articulate other than just the normal process of it changing. Having that conversation, having that advocacy, having that feedback. specific. It's just me.
Do you have a priority of the fulfilling existing TIP projects over adding a new project into the TIP? Or,
What I do, yes, I think the first two categories that we have written down here are probably more important because they're already in the system. Having a call for projects prior to the normal time probably is more complicated than what we need.
I think we agree there. What about if you were to, you had to balance what is more important, funding existing projects like in the TIP, getting them across the line, or adding new projects? I think that's our question.
Yeah, I know, that's the question. I don't know how to answer it without the rest of the people around the table having a, whack at the thing, but the process begins objectively and ends subjectively. And I don't know how you can articulate that policy beyond the policies that we have now, other than these priority rankings that we have, maintaining existing. Obviously, at this moment, I have a dog in the hunt, so I'm a little bit verbal about it, but yeah, I don't know how to come up and say, oh, ABC would be good for it.
Well, I think that's the good thing about ABC. It's not good for everybody. Is at the policy board's direction. If we need to deviate, we deviate. We've done it in project calls. As long as there's a reason. We all know that the priorities for Cove and the priorities for Killeen are different. They're two different jurisdictions. Just like CTCOG and HOTCOG. Our region is different. All of our local jurisdictions have different needs and priorities, and I think the TAC and our policy board do good at recognizing that. And I think putting this in place is a good starting. This is a good starting place for our policy board to be able to make an informed decision on, hey, this is how we want staff to guide it. The understanding that if a change is needed, they can change the policy, or they can change it via an action of the board.
I think kind of how you have it drafted up, I think first priority should go to those projects that are already in the system. Those have been voted on, they've been vetted, they've been allocated. I think having some verbiage of why they need additional money. I mean, cost overruns, cost goes up. In the last 5 years, we've seen prices go through the roof on some items. And those are hard to account for when you're in initial planning of a project. Ultimately, we get pressure from TxDOT to spend our money and get these projects. And if we get to a point where some of these projects have a cost overrun, that puts the cities or municipalities under pressure to find funds when they may not have some. If we have available money, that helps at least get these projects past the goal line, which ultimately is what we're going to pressure. I think that would be probably the #1 priority. And then if we know we don't have some, and if some projects are just totally overrun, granted, I've got one, and it's unreasonable to kind of put all the money in one basket. So other municipalities represent everywhere. Share the wealth. So I think having a percentage wise would probably be very good. 25, maybe a little low. I think we'll let everyone else kind of chime in on that. Probably no more than 50, I would say, just depending on some of these projects. If you have a $15 million project, the idea of coming and asking for 7 more, a little high. These are going to be small increments because as some of these projects, and later on, we may get to the point where some of these projects are getting built less than what was allocated. We have in the future, there's a chance we will have more of this. And then second priority would be going to more projects out on the list. Look for those unfunded ones and see if there's a way they can get more projects. But again, I think priority is getting the projects that we already
also add that the funding increases for existing TIP projects it would be nice. But I worry about the predictability of these funds. Say this cycle, you get funding increases, and we'll have the next cycle, it's unpredictable, you don't know how much money you're gonna have. So I would lean a little bit more towards advancement of new projects into the TIP, ones that are already on the list and just don't have funding yet, and trying to keep those going if we can. I've seen with extra funding, I've seen organizations create a pool of funding in case there's overruns, and then they can draw from this pool. And I was just trying to think too, and then otherwise holding on to that money for the next TIP cycle might be a good idea. I don't know if that's feasible though, if you didn't hold on to that money that was returned to you in 5 years. I don't know if you have to give it back to anybody, but maybe for the next TIP cycle, then you have additional funds. Yeah, those last two were just taken.
I think I would lean a little bit towards maintaining those existing commitments initially. One thought there on the percentage to me, it matters what the dollar value is on that project, right? A 50% overrun on a $1 million project is less impactful than a 25% overrun on a $5 million project, right? So if it's possible, I think it would be valuable to see a percentage or dollar amount put there. Again, if we're talking about bumping from 700,000 to $1 million.
So you're talking like putting maybe some categories, some tiers in here that say anything up to a
right,
50% up to $1 million project.
right. And then having that percentage be different for size of project, I think is valuable. And then the other piece too, I think it matters to me at least the amount of funding that comes available. There's a different conversation if we're talking about less than 5 million versus closer to 10 million that comes available. Those could be two different conversations. Where if you have something that's more in that $5 to $10 million mark, that's probably more comparable for a new project. But if you're under maybe that $5 million mark, then it probably gets more favor towards just shoring up existing projects first.
The policy is code talks about project overruns. It doesn't, I guess it doesn't speak to what we're trying to do. It kind of gears us towards a place to how we can handle overruns. That's very logical. I think it's has to be fair. As least political as possible. It doesn't address, like we did, we released 5 million earlier. There's phase 2 on Cornell that's going away. There's phase 1 that's going away. So that becomes fund balance. And then it makes sense that it becomes available for overruns and costs. But does it address what we're trying to do?
A fund swap,
Yeah, it's fund
a
swap.
project swap.
Right, exactly. And I don't know if you can articulate that in a particular policy, other than working with them to see if there's consensus. Just basically on the fairness, I guess, or whatever it is. So that's also in the back of my mind. See this working great, kind of like, our project cost increased by 50%, and how can you work it? And we have a policy that works out well. But what if you get lucky, so to speak, and get a big federal grant outside the system, and you link or some local dollars? How do we manage that?
I think that would be one of those off chances that the policies, that the TAC and the policy board would have to have those discussions to see if a project swap was what was best, in the best interest of the region.
We've always had to kind of consider that money given to Temple, if they get a federal grant for First Street or Third Street, Veterans Memorial, but just like their funds, the money wasn't necessarily Temple's, it was for that project, and so it didn't automatically go to a next Temple project. It kind of came back to the pot to either be redistributed or, and so that's kind of, I guess, how I've always understood the allocations is towards the projects, not necessarily towards the entities. Now, and it does work in Felton's favor that if it was the desire of the policy board to replace this minor roadway with another minor roadway, Southwest is the next natural project in line. And that is something that they would need to consider when the funding scenarios were selected. That mix of roadway and livability, and that satisfied that mix, that scenario that they selected. That would satisfy that selection. And so I think there's kind of a gamut of situations that we're having to kind of evaluate.
I just don't want that scenario kind of get baked in informally into these policies that once the policy board gets happy with these policies, this issue comes up in November, that they're like, oh, wait, we just have this policy and it doesn't fit anymore. I don't want that to kind of run roughshod. That's, like I said, I got a dog in the hunt right now. I'm thinking about it, so I wanted to just articulate that to you guys. Maybe to the rest of the group here, you know, that's maybe not the point of the conversation, but it would affect the conversation.
Reading the draft, it's not specific where funding becomes available, you know, say in Cat 2, does that funding stay in the Cat 2?
Yes.
You know, I think having something here to fully state that that funding will stay in the category.
Of the category in which it was originally.
Yeah, so you're not, you know, oh, well, that way money available, shift it to their, policy should be, well, if the money stays in the category, you know.
Sir, is there maybe any TxDOT feedback on this approach?
Not really, because it's really the direction of the policy board on where they. To make sure the rules are followed, but it's discretion of the policy board.
Anything else, Kendra?
What I'm hearing a little bit more at this time of maintaining as it reads with existing TIP commitments being a higher priority than funding new projects into the TIP at this time. We'll revise this again and send it back out, and we'll include the tiers provided by David. And we'll continue this dialogue and shoot this to a draft that you all feel comfortable recommending.
Nothing else. We will move to agenda item 8, which is also a discussion item regarding a draft policy or draft project phasing policy, pages 62 through 65. Kendra.
So similar to the funding policy discussion, we also felt it was timely to also draft a project phasing policy to help guide as well whenever we launch our next call for projects in the next year. We've kind of needed a policy for this as well, as far as, you know, a $30 million project, how many times can we really break that project up as long as the scope maintains. And so there's a draft policy for your review.
Any questions? I think the big concern here is, everybody submits their projects. I think we're gonna do one whole project, funding comes back, we realize we need to scale it down. And then that scope is not the same as the project that was voted on, so there are some concerns there on, well, then would this section, this area that's scoped scored the exact same, or even been considered for funding. So I think that's the whole purpose of the policy, is to ensure that when we go to phasing projects, if there's not a major impact to the scope or something that would have had a different impact as we scored the project to make it compete differently. Probably overthinking this, but just want to be on the safe side.
Thinking part of it.
I think what would be useful in this, so we have these discussions regularly about what is a significant scope change. If we can get some guidance and agreement and consensus around the table, these things are significant, and here's some things that are not significant scope changes. I think that would be helpful in developing those phases.
Now that you mentioned that, it may not be an engineering issue, it may be more of the scope is defined as being significant if ranking change. The scoring criteria are affected. Right? So you can change project as long as it doesn't change the scoring criteria or the points that they gain through the scoring criteria. So a significant project change would be a project that changes ranking. And it's not necessarily let's cut the program in half, project in half, but it's really kind of how small can you make it without changing the ranking?
Right.
Now that may be a way of looking at it in terms of scope.
And that would probably be more focused on the objective criteria. So, no, I have a project for changing phases and all that, and I think reasons are we're not changing the scope of the project, but we're being forced to define the limits differently because of other issues like environmental concerns, historical concerns that add delays. So we start looking at changing a project phase or changing the limits or due to other constraints other than what the project actually is. Not changing the scope, but just saying, doing the same roadway, except instead of this section, this section. I don't know how that would affect scoring, but when the overall project was approved, we're trying to make it to where we can spend the money sooner and later. How to write that up, I don't, a little difficult, a little misogyny, but there are other reasons other than just scope. There are delays due to other reviews that can get in the way.
Kind of building on that, if there's a consensus with the group that says, well, it's a big project, but if you carve a bit off of it, then we can fund these others, which has happened over the last funding cycles, and everybody comes to that agreement, regardless what it does to the scores. So I think there probably needs some understanding there somehow or another. That's a possibility. It's always better to get something.
some percentages, if you're changing scope, are you shrinking it, is there a percentage?
Well, and what you're talking about is not really changing the
Yeah.
scope, I guess it's more of reallocating to a different phase of the project.
Flipping, redefining it.
It's almost a three-dimensional process. Three-dimensional process. Maybe four-dimensional. One of the many things I appreciate about the process here is that it's a fluid conversation, based on a number of variables that are just out there that are brought to the table because of the nature of the project, and that those specific criteria or variables are what drive the conversation. That we somehow, come to an agreement on what gets into the next step. And it's a dynamic process that I don't know if you can articulate. Take a stab at what you hope would be the parameters of the phasing policy, but with the understanding that there's more to it.
I guess it's like with everything, we all have policies, ordinances, things that just don't fit sometimes. There are exceptions that have to be made, those conversations have to be made. But, I think it's good to have a policy to guide what staff are doing internally, and then if something else comes up, that conversation can happen.
To explore some wording that addresses that's in there, that it's always there, hanging on the flagpole, so to speak.
Any other feedback?
What's looked at with a kinder eye from a federal state level? Is it more acceptable to have scope expansion because you're able to accomplish more phases with less money, or is it more favorable to whittle away at the scope? Ask big and whittle down, or my thought is, shouldn't we just be coming in with reasonable scopes from the get-go, and then if we can accomplish 2 in 1, maybe, then you couple those together.
Yeah, because time value of money, you want to get as much built as you can as soon as you can, because you have to postpone, take scope out for another future project. So I think what, at least from TxDOT's point of view, what we want to see is reasonable scope and good estimates, so that you don't have to limit stuff out or add stuff. I think what I've seen a lot in my years is, you make an estimate for your project today, and we never revisit it until letting, and it can be filed off based on inflation here. So that's something that you're just gonna keep up with the estimate. You shouldn't be having. That makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And I've been out of the process for a few years now, relying on Jason largely to handle our business prior, but the means to keep that estimate updated, if we have a project call and then time elapses, inflation occurs. I think what we're talking about now in both of these policies really is reflective of high inflation that we've seen in the last, 5 to 7 years, maybe. But in another 5 to 7 years, we could be talking about this in a different manner. It could be a completely different problem. So it feels like to some degree it's a reaction to a problem where we need maybe more regular update to those numbers rather than.
Yeah, update on the estimate, or maybe project inception, look at it and, okay, we're doing this project, but you can say this could be phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, now, right? Pick it out, right?
the need arises.
Basically making modules. All the current machine.
Any other comments? Well, of course, this is just a discussion item. Feel free to shoot over any comments, current gripes, recommendations, if you will, to staff, and we'll try to get those put together and brought to the next TAC meeting. All right, nothing else. We will move to agenda item 9, which is the director's update, pages 66 through 68, present for me. Upcoming meeting dates, of course, June 17th is the policy board meeting, July 1st is the TAC, and then July 15th is the policy board meeting. But I anticipate at the upcoming policy board meeting, we will be asking to push out the July 15th meeting so that staff can attend the PlanCon conference this year. Of course, all those meetings are scheduled for 9:30. I'm going to do the air quality update real quick, which were 82 and 76 parts per billion. For the air quality, I don't know what the jump was. To be honest with you, I can find out and send that information out. I'm going to try to pull up an email real quick that I got late yesterday from MPO about some movement with the, they've changed the name of the bill again to Bill 250. It started out the Basics Act. They changed that to Bill 250. It's moving through the process, but in that process, AMPO has analyzed that there's been a new proposed, OMB has proposed uniform grants regulation changes. I haven't had a chance to review all this, but I wanted to make everybody aware that for the MPOs and broader transportation community, the proposed rules include a mix of potential streamlining reforms and some significant new oversight, compliance, and administrative requirements. AMPO's analysis highlights the provisions most likely to affect MPOs, state DOTs, local governments, transit agency, and other transportation recipients. Once I have had a chance to review this, I will be sending this information out, either myself or Kendra or Callie. We'll get this information out to you so that you can be up to date and up to speed on what those conversations look like and what those proposed grants regulations look like and how they may impact not only the MPO, but your local jurisdictions that access these funds. That being said, that's the biggest thing that I had, and we're all closely monitoring the legislative process and how reauthorization is working. I don't know if TxDOT has any updates that they're working through. Fortunately, I missed the last directors meeting down in Austin. But other than that, I'm open to any questions. Any questions? If not, we will move to agenda item 11, which is member comments. Are there any member comments? None? All right. With no more business of the TAC, we will adjourn at 10:43 a.m. Thank you all.